Hey everybody, Dr. G here. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and body language expert, and today we're going to be analyzing more behavior and body language from former President Donald Trump. What's being referred to as Donald Trump's hush money trial is currently underway. What we're going to be looking at today is his behavior outside of the courtroom. Before we get started, a couple of quick things. One, I wanted to make sure you know that this is not a psychological evaluation of any kind. These are just my opinions. I also wanted to point out that despite the fact we're talking about a politician, I have zero interest in having any influence on your politics. The goal of this is not to be political. I just want to talk about his behavior and his body language. Last thing before we get started is I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, let's go.
Are you ready to lose voters if there's a conviction?
This is an assault on America.
So you can see Donald Trump already speaking before he even gets to the place he's going to stand. He is ready to talk. And this speaks to his nature. He tends to be a bit more impulsive. He does tend to want to get things out quickly. So it's no surprise that he's talking before he even gets to where he wants to stand.
This is an assault on America. Nothing like this has ever happened before. There's never been anything like it. Every legal scholar said this case is nonsense. It should never have been brought.
Now, something I've pointed out before, if you've watched previous videos where I've spoken about Donald Trump's body language, he uses his hands so much for emphasis. Watch this right here.
Nothing like this has ever happened before.
So he gets one sentence out, nothing like this has ever happened before he pulls his hands out to really try to demonstrate how strongly he feels about it.
There's never been anything like it. Every legal scholar said this case is nonsense. It should never have been brought.
So this case is nonsense. It should never have been brought. So, this rhythm, this basically talking about what he wants to say and then really emphasizing certain points to drive it home. This is nonsense. It never should have been brought. That's what he's using his hands to emphasize. And we've seen Donald Trump when he's angry. Oftentimes he'll close his body off. He'll cross his arms. He can look quite angry. Right now, he's trying to give a speech. He really wants people to hear these parts of how unfair he sees the way that he's being treated. So if you watch his hands, that's going to tell you exactly what he wants you to hear. When he emphasizes with his hands, that's the important point to him.
Legal scholar said this case is nonsense. It should never have been brought. It doesn't deserve anything like this. There is no case, and they've said it.
And you can tell he pushes his chest out when he's talking. He moves his hands open. He pushes his chest out. The bigger the point in some ways, the bigger the hands. The farther apart they go, the more he wants to emphasize. And when you push your chest out like that, you can see him doing it subtly. It's not huge. Sometimes he does it more obviously. But when he pushes his hands out, pushes his chest out, he's really trying to show his vulnerability there to say, look, I'm telling the truth. This is what I want you to hear. Because when you think about when we're vulnerable, the parts of us that are most vulnerable, our face, our chest, that's really vital organs. So when we leave that open, that's a vulnerable thing. So when we're trying to emphasize something, sometimes we leave ourselves open and vulnerable.
It doesn't deserve anything like this. There is no case, and they've said it. People that don't necessarily follow or like Donald Trump said this is an outrage that this case was brought. This is political persecution. This is a persecution like never before. Nobody's ever seen anything like it.
Now, this is interesting because he does talk with his hands so much, but right here, he isn't. And I think that that's because there's something called fight or flight, which most people have heard of. But the real steps are freeze, then flight, then fight. Now, when you hear freeze, oftentimes that's in a very literal sense. We stop moving. And so as he's talking about this, now that doesn't mean that he believes that he's in legal peril necessarily, but I think that he takes what he's talking about very seriously. Listen to this part right here. I'll explain more what I mean about the freeze response.
No case, and they've said it. People that don't necessarily follow or like Donald Trump said this is an outrage that this case was brought. This is political persecution. This is a persecution like never before. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And again, it's a case that should have never been brought.
So when he's talking about it being a persecution,
political persecution,
I think that in some ways he may really be concerned about the outcome of this. That doesn't mean that he necessarily thinks that he's going to be found guilty, but I do think that he may have concerns about the impact this is going to have on his future, whether that's the campaign, or it could be that he is concerned about legal jeopardy. But in some sense, the way that he's not emphasizing this also speaks probably to how he feels about it, and he may find real danger in what he sees as persecution.
This is a persecution like never before. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And again, it's a case that should have never been brought. It's an assault on America.
But that's the message he wants to emphasize. It's an assault on America. So when he, and this is pretty typical, actually. If you've seen his other, when he spoke during the last trial, these were the exact same points he would oftentimes emphasize. This is an assault. This is an attack. This is harmful to America, all of these things. And so those are the points that really bring his body language out. This is what really brings his hands out for emphasis.
It should have never been brought. It's an assault on America. And that's why I'm very proud to be here. This is an assault on our country. And it's a country that's failing. It's a country that's run by an incompetent man who's very much involved in this case.
Now, so when he starts talking about Biden, when he's saying it's being run by an incompetent man, watch his hand right here.
It's a country that's run by an incompetent man who's very much involved.
All right, so you see him pointing his finger. He's moving it around. Now, this may sound a little silly, but this is just a fact of how the human body's wired. When we point, it is oftentimes something that's hostile. Now, sometimes it can be that we're pointing to something on a page or that we're pointing something out. But I think as he's doing this, I think that he may have some really genuine dislike for President Biden. So that's why his finger comes out like that. That's why he's not emphasizing it with his hands in a flat way like he was previously. Something different comes out because and if you look at his brow right here, you're also seeing anger. You're seeing the middle of his forehead wrinkle up. I think that there may be some genuine anger around this.
Failing. It's a country that's run by an incompetent man who's very much involved in this case. This is really an attack on a political opponent. That's all it is. So I'm very honored to be here. Thank you very much.
Now we're going to see some of former President Donald Trump at the end of the first day.
So well, and I was looking forward for years to have graduation with his mother and father.
Now look at his eyes right here.
So well, and I was looking forward for years to have graduation with his mother and father there. And it looks like the judge isn't going to allow.
Now, if you'll notice his eyes when he said years, now he opened his eyes wide. He actually looked. He's trying to show that he feels something about this, and that's what we see as he's opening his eyes, as he's looking around.
So well, and I was looking forward for years.
So this is a slightly different expression than we were seeing earlier.
To have graduation with his mother and father there. And it looks like the judge isn't going to allow me to escape this scam. It's a scam trial. If you read all of the legal pundits, all of the legal scholars today, there's not one that I see that said this is a case that should be brought or tried.
As I said before, when he sits still, that it could be that freeze, flight, or fight response. He, in a very real way, could feel threatened by what's happening right now. And we're not seeing the arms move. We're not seeing the hands come up. It's just very different for Donald Trump.
It's a scam. It's a political witch hunt. It continues, and it continues forever. And we're not going to be given a fair trial. It's a very, very sad thing. In addition, as you know, next.
Although he is emphasizing with his head, he's leaning it forward like this. It's a very sad thing. He still wants to connect, because what we do is when we lean forward, we're trying to connect with our audience. When we lean backward, we're trying to gain some distance. So in this way, he really wants people to hear this. He really wants people to connect with what he's saying about how unfair this is, about how corrupt all of this is, and how he shouldn't be going through this, how there's no political scholars that agree, and all of this stuff. This is what he wants people to connect with.
Next Thursday, we're before the United States Supreme Court on a very big hearing on immunity. And this is something that we've been waiting for a long time. And the judge, of course, is not going to allow us. He's a very conflicted judge. And
he's a very conflicted judge. That's when he leans forward. That's what he wants his audience to hear. That's how he wants to connect. He's a very conflicted judge. So the parts that he highlights like that, those are really the things that people are going to actually remember better as well. And so unconsciously we process things like this. You may see it, but then afterwards, if you said, describe all the things Donald Trump talked about, the times when he emphasizes with his hands, when he nods with his head, those are the things you're more likely to remember.
Immunity. And this is something that we've been waiting for a long time. And the judge, of course, is not going to allow us. He's a very conflicted judge. And he's not going to allow us to go to that. He won't allow me to leave here for a half a day, go to...
So he's a very conflicted judge. He won't allow me to leave to go to my son's graduation. Those are the things that are going to stand out, because that's what it is that he's emphasizing.
D.C. and go before the United States Supreme Court because he thinks he's superior, I guess, to the Supreme Court. And we got a real problem with.
And you see him lick his lips afterwards. This is probably where the frustration is starting to build, because the more adrenaline we've got, we do start to lick our lips, because if there's excitement, fear, those types of feelings, that does tend to make our mouths dry out. We do tend to lick our lips more then. Watch this right here.
Because he thinks he's superior, I guess, to the Supreme Court. We got a real...
So that the disdain, the dislike for the judge is coming through very clearly, and that's showing in his body language. And I presume that he would agree with that. I think that that's something that he is trying to express.
Problem with this judge. We have a real problem with a lot of things having to do with this trial, including the DA, because you go right outside.
Now, see, watch his eyebrows when he says this.
A lot of things having to do with this trial, including the DA.
Now, his eyebrows went up. That's when he wants to bring emphasis to his face. So as he's talking about the DA, he wants you to focus on him. Another thing that upsets him greatly, but he doesn't always talk with his eyebrows. So it's a different type of body language we're seeing as he's talking about the DA.
Because you go right outside and people are being mugged and killed all day long, and he's sitting here all day with about 10 or 12 prosecutors.
Now, this is something he also said, or something similar that he also said during the last trial, which was talking about how people are being mugged and killed, talking about the crime going on. Now we're seeing more body language. He's looking around. He's almost acting out. Look out there. That's where all this bad stuff is happening. And this is a way to connect with people, to be more kinetic in that way, makes people feel more about what he's saying.
Real problem with this judge. We have a real problem with a lot of things having to do with this trial, including the DA, because you go right outside and people are being mugged and killed all day long, and he's sitting.
And then this signal, this, as I talked about, how pointing can be a way to show hostility. And because think about it. Think about when you're a kid. If you have a parent that points at you, it doesn't feel good. We don't like being pointed at. We inherently dislike it. So oftentimes when we're pointing at somebody, that tends to be somebody that we don't like, or somebody that we have a problem with at that time.
Here all day with about 10 or 12 prosecutors over nothing. Over what people say shouldn't be a trial. So I just want to thank you very much, but that I can't go to my son's graduation, or that I can't go to the United States Supreme Court, that I'm not in Georgia or Florida or North Carolina.
See how he's leaning forward a little bit when he says this?
That I can't go to my son's graduation, or that I can't go to the United States Supreme Court.
I think that oftentimes when Donald Trump is trying to connect with people, that he believes if you listen to what I'm saying, if you hear what I'm saying, you're going to agree with me. And so as he's talking, as he's leaning forward more, as he's trying to connect, he really does have certain points that he feels like are very important, like the fact that he's not going to be allowed to go to his son's graduation. He's leaning in after he talks about that.
That I'm not in Georgia or Florida or North Carolina campaigning like I should be. It's perfect for the radical left Democrats. That's
See, when he said the perfect for the radical left Democrats, you saw him open up again. Watch his arms. I mean, you can't see his hands right here, but watch the position his arms go in.
Campaigning like I should be. It's perfect for the...
See, he's opening his hands up right then. That's he once again wants to emphasize the left, the Democrats. Those are the bad guys. You got to focus on that.
Radical left Democrats. That's exactly what they want. This is about election interference. That's all it's about. Thank you very much.
So you can see the way that his hands move. Election, which he sort of puts a point on like this.
Left Democrats. That's exactly what they want. This is about election.
So a non-threatening gesture when he says election.
Interference.
And then interference. He wants to make sure people remember this. He's he's swiping his hand across broadly. Election interference. That's a way to get people to really connect with that, to remember of all the different points he made. He was mistreated. He's not going to be able to see his son graduate. And election interference, which is a bad thing, that's what's happening. So through his body language, he really does unconsciously connect with people. I mean, everybody does. That's how we use body language. But he uses his hands oftentimes to express his body language, and he does it in a way that I think really does connect with people that are listening to him. Now let's watch a little bit of day 2, and then we're going to finish up.
This trial will cost you the White House. You think you violated the gag order, sir?
Thank you very much. This is a trial that should have never been brought. It's a trial that is being...
Now, what we're seeing on day 2 is he's more energized. I think he's angrier today. He's speaking more quickly. He's blinking more. So I think today we're going to be seeing a slightly different Donald Trump. Not that he was subdued on the first day, but he was a little bit calmer. The way he was speaking was a little bit slower. So let's see what's different today.
A trial that should have never been brought. It's a trial that is being looked upon, looked at all over the world. They're looking at it and analyzing.
So there he goes with the eyebrows.
Looked at all over the world.
So he's saying that everybody in the world is looking at this. That's what he wants you to hear. That's when the eyebrows go up. So everybody's paying attention to this right now. So he's making this a global issue.
Looking at it and analyzing it. Every legal pundit, every legal scholar said this trial is a disgrace. We have a Trump-hating judge.
So now he's back with the hands to emphasize. And I think after sitting on this for a day, he probably had a lot of thoughts about this last night. And he comes back out and he's really feeling strongly about the different points that he has. So as he's going through these today, it seems like we've got a stronger emotion out of him. He's got stronger emphasis about these things.
Said this trial is a disgrace. We have a Trump-hating judge. We have a judge who shouldn't be on this case. He's totally conflicted. But this is a trial that should never happen. It should have been thrown out a long time ago. If you
See, and there he is emphasizing with his chest pumping out. It should have been thrown out. And so in a lot of ways, as he does that, that's a way to make himself seem larger. And I don't mean that in like a comical sense of like he's literally envisioning himself being bigger, but in some ways, in subtle ways, unconsciously, we do things like that to make ourselves seem larger because we're feeling that way. And it's a way to show dominance and power.
Look at Jonathan Turley, Andy McCarthy, all great legal scholars. There's not one that...
Now, watch his mouth right here.
McCarthy, all great legal scholars.
So, as he's talking about these great legal scholars, he's licking his lips. Once again, I think that he's getting angry as he's talking about this. He's really wanting to emphasize this point. He's feeling very frustrated about it, and he's wanting to make sure people understand, I don't think that this is fair, and there are other people that agree with me.
There's not one that we've been able to find that said this should be a trial. I was paying a lawyer and marked it down as a legal expense, some accountant.
So what we're seeing now, he's leaving his hands up pretty persistently. And this is a lot more like what we typically see from Donald Trump. So it's interesting to see that his body language changed from day one to day two. Like I said, he may feel more in his element. Maybe the stress of going through day one is down some today, but the body language is more like what you would typically see from Donald Trump.
This should be a trial. I was paying a lawyer and marked it down as a legal expense, some accountant.
See, when I talked about how when we point, it's a bit more hostile. Right now, he's trying to talk about something that was a legal expense. He wants people to understand him, so he's not pointing and running his finger across. He closes his hand. See, watch this right here.
Lawyer and marked it down.
See, that's a less aggressive signal than like if he had put his finger and pointed it across. That may sound overly picky, but when people are used to public speaking, they learn these things. They know what to do and what not to do. So oftentimes they pick up hand signals like this so that they don't point, because you learn not to point at people when you're doing public speaking. So you'll just notice a difference depending on the subject he's talking about in terms of how he uses his hands. It makes a big difference.
As a legal expense, some accountant, I didn't know, marked it down as a legal expense. That's exactly what it was. And you get indicted over that? I should be right now in Pennsylvania, in Florida, in many other states, North Carolina, Georgia, campaigning. This is all coming from the Biden White House, because the guy can't put two sentences together. He can't campaign. They're using this in order to try and win an election.
Right. So it goes back to, if you notice the difference of, he put his hands down when he's talking about the different states, but when it comes back to Biden, his hands come back out. I got to emphasize, he is the guy that's coming after me.
And it's not working that way. It's working the opposite way. So check that out. Legal expense. It's called legal expense. That's what you're supposed to call it.
And you're seeing, and this may sound strange, but you're seeing more of his teeth today. Another thing that we do when we're feeling aggressive, we bare our teeth a little bit. And so watch the way he says this. And I know this is how he talks, but it's different today than it was the day before to some degree.
So check that out. Legal.
So when he's showing his teeth, I think he feels very frustrated by that. He is trying to articulate himself, but at the same time, I think there's some aggression below that because he doesn't like what he's having to talk about.
Expense. It's called legal expense. That's what you're supposed to call it. You get indicted on that. Nobody's ever seen it. Nobody has ever seen anything like it.
And watch his eyebrows right here.
Get indicted on that. Nobody's ever seen it.
So nobody's ever seen this. That's something that he feels strongly about, because you got to think about this. Body language is largely, but not entirely, but largely unconscious. Like I said, you can manipulate some of what your hands are doing when you're orating or when you're giving a speech or something like that. So there may be some thought put into it, but eyebrow raises and stuff, that is typically unconscious. So this is something that he feels strongly about. It's something that he connects with.
Nobody has ever seen anything like it. So thank you very much for coming. I'm now going to sit down for many hours. I am now going to sit down. The voters understand it. All you have to do is look.
See, there's the head nod again. The voters understand it. It's him connecting with the voters, connecting with his audience.
Many hours. I am now going to sit down. The voters understand it. All you have to do is look at the polls. This is a sham trial, and the judge should recuse himself.
See, and there's the finger again.
This is a sham trial, and the judge should recuse.
So, pointing, the judge should recuse himself. It really is, if you pay attention to the way that he talks, the way that he points, the way that he does his hands like this, there is a distinct pattern to the way that he uses his body language in this way. And some of it's intentional, some of it isn't. But I think this type of body language is somewhat intentional.
Recuse himself because he's totally conflicted. Thank you very much.
So we're going to go ahead and stop here. Hopefully this is helping you better understand some of the body language that we're observing. Now, they don't allow cameras in the courtroom, so unfortunately I can't talk about him on trial. That being said, for the Georgia trial, I will be able to. So make sure to subscribe if you want to see that. Whenever that happens, I will be covering that in great detail. But for now, as he continues to talk out about these things, as he speaks outside of the courtroom, I will be covering that if people want to see more of it. If there are specific videos you want me to analyze, please let me know in the comments below. Last thing before we get finished up is I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, thanks for watching.